how do you deal with that, with the pressure for short and long-term predictions from decision makers that outstrip our ability to predict?
Well, let me see, first of all, Jonathan, that there's no such thing as earthquake weather or earthquake climate. So let's settle that. But I'll be happy to debate that with somebody. Really, when we talk about science in this sort of sphere, we're talking about how science gets used. And so when we come up with numbers or boundaries like 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees or 3 degrees, where does that come from? And it comes from the study of the planet. It comes from some sense of what the perturbations we're putting into the atmosphere, namely in terms of carbon dioxide and other chemicals, what do they do to the atmospheric system? Can it be predicted? And how uncertain are we about those predictions? So in reality, there are quite a few uncertainties. How do we communicate those uncertainties? Now, Lamont's been in the Palisades for 66 years now. I've been there for about 30 of them. And in dealing with how the science actually gets used, we often think about it being predicated on there being a rational system for taking that scientific result and putting it into some sort of decision process. Perhaps the most rational system is the one that Mike is involved with, which has to do with climate change law. But when Elke starts talking about there being limits to the rationality of decision making, that's when we begin to get worried. So how do we actually make it clear that there's a process that's very dynamic in understanding the planet? And science itself is going to be changing the results. The fact that it's changing doesn't mean that we're wrong. It means that we're learning more about the planet. And every time we learn something, that can contribute to the universe of decisions that need to be made, whether they're rational in terms of things like tax policy or bilateral agreements between nations, or whether they, in some sense, frame the political debate, which, as we all know, can be grossly irrational in many ways. So we deal in many ways with that pressure. How do we get across the process of doing science about this wonderfully complex system that's the planet Earth? We know a lot about it, but there's a lot left to learn. And how do we get that wonder that, this is a planet that we live on, it is dynamic, it is changing, humans are perturbing it. We talk about the Anthropocene, that can be another topic of discussion. But it is, in fact, the inevitable consequence of geological processes that's going on. And how do we get that wonder across in a very optimistic way? This is what we're learning, this is what we're about to learn, this is what we need to know, and this is how it might affect the decisions you have to make.